JJ the CPA here. I want to talk about the PPP tax adjustment that the IRS came out with further clarification on in this video. I'm hoping that this will reach the wonderful congresspersons that represent Oklahoma, as well as Senators Lankford and Senator Inhofe in their offices. I am not putting this video together for those that are going to tune in otherwise. For you here on November 30th to find a way to not follow what the IRS has indicated thus far. The purpose of this video is to maybe aid in those that are helping Congress override, I feel properly, the IRS and their conclusion. I understand the IRS's conclusion is consistent with, in essence, what has been laid out in Revenue Ruling 2020-27. But here's two things to think through. One, the CARES Act in Section 1105I, which I have a link to in the body of this video, specifically states, and I read, taxability, in all caps, canceled indebtedness under this section shall be excluded from gross income of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. We all know that. That seems like an obvious. When I go, though, and I look at then indebtedness cancellation and the rules and regulations around that, based on what I have found, I go to publication 4681, page 10, which ties to IRS Form 982, which both of those things combined surround how you treat debt cancellation for tax purposes. And when there is debt canceled, it does indicate in that publication 4681, page 10, that it is a reduction or does affect tax attributes. Tax attributes defined as NOLs, carryover losses, credits, and certain basis in assets. But it does not indicate at all, these are publications and forms that have been around for a while, but it does not indicate anywhere that it is then a reduction of any expenses that have been taken previously. And so while I am trying to find a fine line to maybe help Congress, if I could be so bold as saying that, in maybe coming up with a position that they could feel comfortable with, when the CARES Act indicates specifically taxability, cancellation of indebtedness under this section shall be excluded from gross income, the IRS has come out and then said, well, that's tax-free income. And I did look up what's the difference between tax-exempt and tax-free income. Probably could really conclude they're both the same things, but are they? Tax-free income is income free from tax. The IRS indicated in Revenue Ruling 2020-27 that because it's tax-free income, the PPP loan that's forgiven, therefore the expenses that are associated with that tax-free income are then not deductible. That doesn't seem to follow any precedents. I've been practicing for 28 years. I don't know it all, but I've not come across anything on point to that. However, I understand that they listed court cases, etc. But the court cases, my second aspect here that they were listing, if you will, was addressing the parallel the IRS was drawing as it relates to the attorneys that are in the plaintiff side of the law business that aren't able to deduct expenses on a contingency case. As in, as they are progressing throughout the case, they're not able to deduct any expenses until the case is resolved, whether it's thrown out or there is a settlement. But until then, they are not able to deduct the expenses. Well, the parallel I draw there is that that is something that eventually yields a loss or a gain. It eventually yields a taxable event when you have an attorney that has expenses during a plaintiff case, a contingency fee case, and then at the conclusion of it, then that is when the expenses are then taken. So I may have just not followed what the IRS was pulling together as it relates to that comparison of making PPP forgiveness amount than a tax adjustment. I'm saying that I didn't follow that, how it applies. So there are great, smart, wonderful people at the Internal Revenue Service. So I'm going to repeat again, this video is not November 30, 2020, for you, the viewer of this, to take any of this and then decide you're not going to make a tax adjustment. I will be making, unless Congress overrides this specifically, I will be making for myself and all of my clients a tax adjustment. The IRS made it clear in their IRS Notice 2020-32, as well as their revenue ruling and well as Revenue Procedure 2020-51, that this is, in essence, the interpretation of the IRS, and the only way it's going to be overridden is by an act of Congress, which I have indicated in prior videos. I think that's the IRS doing a great job of saying, all right, Congress, here's our interpretation of the law that you wrote. So we're teeing it up for you. So if you do want to override it, you know all the facts and circumstances and what we're relying on, meaning the IRS, in this position that we are taking. So what's the difference between tax exempt and tax-free income? What's the difference between tax-free income and canceled debt that's then not included in gross income? So the CARES Act doesn't say it's tax-free income. It's saying that canceled indebtedness shall be excluded from gross income. I get it. Potato, potato. Okay, are we talking about, is it tax-free? Is it tax-exempt? Are those the same things? So all I'm trying to do is maybe follow a better conclusion in my mind, that if the IRS is indicating that in the CARES Act, it indicates that the canceled indebtedness shall be excluded from gross income, and then is saying that it's tax-free income, they're going in that direction. They're drawing a parallel that I didn't quite follow as something that would actually affect or apply to the PPP forgiveness amount equaling a tax adjustment. What I went through is like, okay, well, what's the CARES Act say? It's indebtedness that's canceled that's not included in gross income. So what's that part of the law and the IRS publications and the IRS forms put into play? So I think that there's a real fine line there. I hope that Congress will be able to help the IRS, because I do feel the IRS is taking a position that they feel is consistent with the past, that has precedence. I don't believe the IRS is taking a position to purposely affect negatively those that are the ones that are received PPP and are getting it forgiven. Hopefully you've made it to here, because the last thing is that there's quite different from this, but there's quite a difference in the tax treatment that seems unfair. And I know life can be unfair, but there's the self-employed Schedule C filer is not having to make any kind of tax adjustment because the PPP that they received was based on their net income. So they're making zero tax adjustment for a Schedule C filer. For the employer that received the PPP, obviously, any amount that's forgiven is a reduction in that expense. So not treated the same. The other aspect of that with the employers that are having that reduction in their expenses due to the PPP forgiveness is that those employees are paying tax on those wages. Those wages were subject to payroll taxes. The landlord and the banks and the utility companies that are receiving these dollars from the employer, from those that got the PPP funds and used them properly for that, there is going to be a tax consequence to those that received it. So to, in essence, say, well, whatever you got and then got it forgiven, you're not going to be able to deduct it. If the argument is, well, the IRS needs to, or the U.S. Treasury needs to recoup tax dollars on that, the U.S. Treasury is recouping tax dollars on the recipients of the PPP funds. The one last thing I'll note to you is that for those that got PPP and paid their employees, you all know this, but the employer did not get any tax break for the employer portion of the payroll taxes. So there are many, many employers that could have gone the option of not taking PPP and just let their employees go on unemployment, but they opted to follow the government's lead to keep employees employed. So they got the PPP money, they used it to pay their employees, but in addition to that, they had Social Security and Medicare taxes, 7.65%, in addition to the wages that solely came out of the employer's pocket. So the employer is in a situation where, yes, they got the money, it passed right on to third parties, the utility companies, the banks, the landlords, the employees, and the payroll was subject to payroll tax, but the employer got no break for any of that. So at the end of the day, while the IRS, I feel, and I've said it from the beginning, is following its protocol, if you will, it does seem though Congress's intent when it said the taxability, very, very direct in Section 1105I, canceled indebtedness under this section shall be excluded from gross income of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. Congress meant for it to have zero tax effect, not just for the self-employed, but for those that got the PPP and got it forgiven either way. So, all right, hey, hopefully I put that together. I'd love it if somebody would expand on this. I'm a CPA here in Oklahoma, just a sole practitioner. I'm sure there's other great minds out there that would be able to take this and run with it and might be able to blow holes all through it, and it doesn't necessarily stand. But what can stand is that Congress comes in and just helps the IRS further clarify very clearly that the PPP forgiveness amount is zero tax adjustment for all those that got the PPP forgiven. So Congress can, in essence, rectify this with more clarification so that the IRS will have that to follow. All right. Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you have any additional information, my email is jj@jjthecpa.com. And I'm going to put links in the body of this to Section 1105I of the CARES Act, IRS Notice 2020-32, Revenue Ruling 2020-27, Revenue Procedure 2020-51, IRS Publication 4681, and IRS Form 982. Thanks for tuning in, and for those that are not in Congress or their team, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. If you got it to here and it provided any value, please share this video. Again, just trying to help and make sure that if we don't have to have a tax adjustment, then we don't. And if this happened to make it to anybody that has any inside position, if you will, working with, for those wonderful men and women in Congress, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And if you know of anybody that works in Congress or in the Senate that you could forward this video to, that'd be great. We're just here to help. But for now, we're going to follow the IRS's lead. Just need Congress to clarify. All right. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Love it if you'd subscribe. And then don't you ever forget, you've never met a CPA quite like me. All right. Hey, have a great one.